All right, excellent. Well, I want to welcome everybody to Vision Serve Alliance's webinar series. And this webinar will be transportation, how it works, and how to make it better. Um, Before we start, some of our webinars are hosted by our platinum members of conference and year-round members. So this is one of those webinars, and appropriately so, it is hosted by Userve. So you're going to get double introductions today, but I'm going to do a brief introduction for Ron Brooks, who is the Senior Director of Policy and Stakeholder Engagement at Userve. And Userve is founded, um, founded and developed as I'm reading the wrong piece of paper, folks. I apologize. Userve is a transportation network company that is built from the ground up to connect people with disabilities to pre-scheduled and on-demand transportation that is safe, accessible, and easy to use. So, Ron, can you just take a moment or two as our sponsor and tell us about Userve and your role there?
Sure. Well, first off, everybody, good afternoon. I am Ron Brooks, happy to be here today and happy to be sponsoring on behalf of Userve this session. Userve, as we all know, about 25% of people with disabilities and older adults need some kind of help with transportation. It could be door-to-door service. It could be the fact that you're traveling with a service animal or a guide dog and you need a driver who will accept that animal in their vehicle. It could be that you have a wheelchair or a mobility device and you need to secure your vehicle. Userve is a company that believes independent mobility, the ability to get around on your own and on your own terms, is something that everybody should have, including those of us who are have disabilities or who are older and who need that assistance. We are in about 40 programs in about 30 cities across 16 states. We work with transit agencies and paratransit providers to deliver transportation that with using our technology platform and a TNC platform, which is kind of like those rideshare companies that you've heard of. Our service works the same way, except that our drivers are fully credentialed. They go through education to learn how to provide appropriate assistance for folks with disabilities, and we have done what we can through our rider app and through our call center and through the service that we provide to make sure that it's accessible for everybody. And that really aligns well with really Vision Serve's goals around transportation. And with that, I will toss it back over to Jason.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Ron. And I'll give it back to you in just a moment or two. So just to frame our webinar today, we all know that people with blindness and low vision really do face many barriers when it comes to accessibility and accessing transportation. And our goal is, in order to advocate for ourselves as people with lived experience or for the people we represent, it's really important to understand how transportation and pedestrian infrastructure work. Just to touch on it a little bit, it's managed by many agencies and programs on many government levels, depending on what transportation we're accessing. And it's just simply really important to have some awareness of that and to get involved as we advocate for that. Accessing transportation is what keeps us active in the community. As all of you know, Vision Serve Alliance has identified sort of 6 pillars that we advocate for. Transportation is one of those pillars. Ron and Denise are both are the co-chairs of our transportation committee. So let me give a brief introduction of them before we start. Denise Jess is with us today. She is the executive director of the Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Vision Impaired. she serves on so many boards, committees, and commissions that I'm not going to rattle them all off here, but just know that it is many, including on the board of directors for Vision Serve Alliance. She advocates on many, many issues related to equity and accessibility for folks living with blindness and vision loss. Today, most importantly for today, is her advocacy work on transportation and pedestrian safety. As I was saying before, let me reintroduce Ron Brooks. Ron Brooks holds two positions that are really important for this webinar. One was as the Senior Director of Policy and Stakeholder Engagement at USERV, which is why he introduced USERV as our sponsor. He's also the founder and CEO of Accessible Avenue. Ron is a 30-year veteran of the transportation industry, where he has focused on accessibility issues, using transit systems. He's co-author of a book, All Aboard, Conducting Accessible Community Involvement in Public Transit. He spoke at our conference. I'm a gigantic fan of these two people. I think this is a very, very important work that they are doing. VSA is happy to partner with them. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to them. And I believe, Ron, back to you to kick us off.
First off, I just want to just say that I've been involved in with Vision Serve Alliance since 2023. I was invited to co-chair the Transportation Working Group with Denise, and I have been singularly impressed with Denise's knowledge of transportation and also pedestrian accessibility. I've worked with communities for a long time, and I've worked in the disability community on behalf of transit for my whole career. And I don't know that many people who are on the community side of the coin who are as well versed in the issues as Denise. She's really, really good. And for any of you who are out in the world of agencies and serving the community on that side, I don't live in your reality. I live in a different kind of part of the world. But Denise lives your life, and she's in your space doing what you do. And she's really good at this stuff. So if you ever have a question from the perspective of an agency, she is probably one of the best people I can think to go to. So, all right, well, let me just jump right in. So I have a slide presentation, slide deck. Helen is going to run that. Thank you, Helen, for that. And I'm going to try to keep us on time, which is hard with transportation because, as we all know, it sometimes runs late. But I'm going to do my very best. So on my first slide here, my title slide, how transportation works and how to make it work better. I hope we can cover both of those. There's a lovely picture of me and my guide dog, York, who is a yellow Labrador. We are hanging out near our home. We live in the Phoenix metropolitan area. And we are hanging out at the Tempe Transit Center, which is near Arizona State University. And we're hanging out, there's buses. So it's a very transit kind of looking picture. So just a little bit about me, and some of this was already said. Again, 30 years in the industry, all of it has been as a person who is blind, but also as a person who's worked with the community. So I've gotten that to wear that challenging set of hats where you're in the community and you sort of want things to work the way that works for you. And you're also in the industry and you're kind of trying to live the reality of delivering service. And it's challenging, but it's really good because what it's allowed me to do is to really think about how we design and deliver service for people who need the service. And I have a bunch of friends who, and family, and me too, who are direct recipients of those services and consumers of those services, who give me lots of earfuls over the years about how we could do things better. The next slide here, I had the opportunity to write a chapter in a book called The New Future of Public Transportation. And I wrote the book on the future of paratransit, which was a really cool honor. The book was written by kind of a celebrity in the industry, we'll say, Paul Comfort. He's been around. He's got a podcast called Transit Unplugged. He's pretty entertaining. Um, but we're seeing a lot of things happening in the industry, and I'm just going to give you a spoiler alert. Right now, as you all know, we're in times of great uncertainty around funding. I mean, right now, our government is currently shut down because they can't agree on the money. Um, and there's a lot of uncertainty, but I'm going to tell you that there are some bright spots and there are some opportunities that are out there, and transportation is one of them. And part of that is just sort of weird political coincidence, and some of it is just the fact that there's a whole lot happening in transportation, in the area of technology and business innovation, that I think creates some really cool opportunities for people who are smart about how they advocate and about how they approach advocacy. So, and that's really what this is all about. Next slide. As we all know, the ability to get where we need and want to go is a really big deal for people who are blind or low vision, and it's super challenging. And it's challenging, and some of this data comes from AFB, from some work that they did a few years ago. But in a survey that they did, 38% of respondents turned down a job because of transportation concerns. 29% of respondents identified transportation as one of the factors, as a major factor for being unemployed. And 40% of people living in urban areas and 65% of people living in rural areas said that not being able to drive limited their ability to participate in meaningful activities. So transportation is, as we all know, is one of those huge barriers that really affects people who are blind or visually impaired. Next slide. This also, the kind of challenges that we're talking about here, inconsistent availability within communities and across communities, so, and around the country. So, I mean, depending on where you live, you may have good transportation or it may be terrible. But usually, if in any community, you're going to have some people who have a little bit more and some people who have a little bit less. And so it's not like a one size fits all. It's not like if you're in Phoenix, you have great transportation, because some people do and some people don't. We don't have good infrastructure to support the use of transit. And so when we talk about accessibility of communities, things like sidewalks, things like accessible pedestrian signals, things that people need in order to get to and from transit aren't present. So even if the transit is good, getting to it and getting from it aren't. And so folks struggle. We have very uneven levels of digital accessibility. I think this is going to change fairly soon, because so far, at least, this particular law, which is a relatively new change to the ADA that requires digital accessibility, appears to be being enforced, but this is still a challenge. Some websites are good, some transit websites are not. Even the apps that we use, they vary. Even today, this morning, I was on an app or on a website that wasn't very accessible, and and you never know when it's going to happen. Inflexible and unreliable paratransit. There are many communities where the service that people who are blind or have low vision are expected to use when public transit isn't working is terrible. It doesn't meet their needs. You have to book your life at least a day in advance. You can't make changes. You can't plan. You don't know how long your trips are going to take or when they're going to show up, or if they're going to show up in some cases. And so it's very difficult to deal with. And then, of course, lack of money to purchase private transportation. Most of us aren't rolling in the dough here, and transportation, if you buy it on your own, can be fairly expensive. Challenges extend to agencies as well. And these are pretty obvious and straightforward. We can't, if we're trying to hire people who are blind or low vision, getting them to our facilities and to our programs is difficult. Getting our clients into programs on time, getting them out on time can be a challenge. And the effect that has on agencies. I remember I was at a large Kansas City agency a few years back and watching a paratransit come and pick people up and get them picked up in the afternoon. And it took two staff members the better part of an hour to try to do this goat rope of getting people to the right vehicles and the right drivers and getting everybody matched up. And all of that lost productivity came at the expense of the agency's other programs, services, and budget. So, yeah, those are the kind of challenges that we all face on a pretty regular basis. I've got a few objectives. First, I want to take a deep dive into public transportation, how the industry works, how big it is, the types of transportation that are provided, how it's funded, how it's planned, how it's managed. I want to talk about some of the opportunities, challenges that are facing the industry right now, how and where individuals can advocate, and thoughts on how we can improve the thoughts of our overall transportation advocacy. And interspersed in that is going to be some conversation around pedestrian accessibility, which is a huge part of making our transportation more accessible. This presentation largely follows the presentation that I gave in April at the Vision Serve Alliance Leadership Conference. Hopefully not too many of you were there, but if you were, there's a little bit of new content. A lot of it's repeat, but I encourage you, if transportation is a challenge for you or for your agency or for your staff or for your clients, hopefully this content will be helpful. Okay, so let's talk about the industry. First off, when we talk about public transportation, we are talking about any kind of transportation that is publicly subsidized by a transit agency. And that could be a transit authority, like the Chicago Transit Authority or the New York Metropolitan Transit Authority, or it could be a small town transit system. It could be a nonprofit that's getting federal funds to do transit in a rural community. But it's basically publicly subsidized transportation. It could be bus, it could be light rail, it could be streetcar, it could be paratransit, it could be anything like that. And we'll get a little more detail in a minute. It is a large industry just for public transit, just the big publicly subsidized transit. I'm going to give you some numbers. These come from the American Public Transportation Association, which is the big trade association that represents the industry. It's an 80 billion with a B, $80 billion industry per year. About 6,800 agencies and providers are involved in delivering service. And they're all different. Let me tell you, when you've seen one, you've seen one. There are 6,800 of them across the country. Workforce is around 430,000 people. And transit's available in most communities. However, the availability and accessibility is very uneven. About 55% of Americans live in areas that are served by transit. And we typically define that as within about a quarter mile of a bus stop. But that means about 45% are not. So like I would give myself as an example, I'm in an area in a city, we just moved, where we are technically not close to transit. Now I like to walk, so for me, I can get to it, but it's more than a half a mile to the nearest transit. If you have any kind of a health condition, that becomes a little bit of a challenge, especially when you're down here in the Phoenix area summers when it's 110 degrees. Other parts of the country have that challenge looks different. Transit use varies widely across the country. If you're in an urban area, about 21% of people use public transportation on a regular basis. If you're in a suburban area, that number drops to about 6%. And if you're in a rural area, which is defined as a community of less than 50,000 people, or in just an unincorporated large area with few people, about 3% of those folks use transportation. So it does vary widely. So digging a little bit more into the types of transportation, it varies widely by community. Every community is different. First, you have fixed route transportation. Fixed route transportation is pre-scheduled transportation that runs on a route. So if you have a bus that runs at set times along a route, that is fixed route transportation. It's typically going to be bus or light rail or streetcar, and it's typically going to be running all day long bi-directionally along a route. And the reason that that matters is because it is only where fixed route service is available that paratransit is required. So if you're in an urban area, like a large metropolitan area that has bus service, but it also has like express buses or commuter rail services, those services do not carry the mandate for ADA paratransit. So what you'll see, and I'll use, I'm thinking about a community. I'll use LA is a bad example. I'll use Miami as an example. So in Miami, you have a public transit that runs within the city of Miami, and that carries a requirement for paratransit. You also have a couple of train services, and you have express bus services that go into some of the outlying areas. There's no requirement for paratransit in those communities, and so those folks have to be able to use the other services. ADA paratransit runs during in the same areas as fixed route transit during the same hours and on the same days of service. Some agencies do a little bit more than that, but that's the mandate. Transit also supports things which we kind of generally call active transportation. Those are things like electric bikes, scooters. Those, from a blind person's perspective, are mostly sidewalk furniture that just gets in the way, and it's always, it's like a orientation mobility hazard. But those are also publicly subsidized forms of transportation. Okay, so talk a little bit about how transportation is regulated and funded. So a lot of detail here on this slide. So I want to talk first about regulation, and I'm going to throw a lot of words at you. Here's the point. It's all different. Transportation is regulated at the federal level, but those regulations are fairly minimal, actually. They are mostly tied to how it gets funded and basic requirements that it has to meet. But it is regulated at the federal, state, and local level. So at the federal level, there's some regulation. States add additional layers of regulation, and local communities add some as well. And we'll talk a little bit about like how to know where to put your advocacy efforts. Transit is funded by a mix of federal, state, and local money. And I'm going to tell you, just as a spoiler, most of the money comes from the local. The federal government puts in money mostly for equipment like vehicles and technology and facilities. There are some exceptions to that, but most money at the federal money is to support the infrastructure. Some states, not all, but some provide additional funding. And then most money comes from the local government. And that has big implications for how you advocate. Transportation is typically managed at the local or regional level. So even though there's some money that comes from the feds and some money that might come from the states, and there's some regulations that come from the fed and the state, all the decision-making in transit happens locally in terms of the details. And again, that's super important from an advocacy standpoint. So I want to talk about some of the challenges facing the transportation industry, because these challenges are things that the industry that basically cause the industry to work the way it does, or in some cases not work the way it doesn't. And then I want to talk about some opportunities. And I've got about 6 challenges. The first one is, as we just talked about on the last slide, it is a decentralized decision-making structure with different agencies responsible for different pieces of the pie. So it's not, even though decisions are made locally for like how it's operated, those folks have to answer to people who are giving them money and setting regulations at all different levels of government. And so that tends to make people very risk averse. They don't want to do things that haven't been done before because they want to make sure they're not going to get in trouble. It's a complex regulatory environment. There are lots of regulations that affect transit. Things like the ADA, of course, is pretty straightforward, and we're all somewhat familiar with that. But there's also regulations around background checks for drivers and drugs and alcohol testing, and rules for how projects get built, and rules for how money gets spent, how procurements get conducted, and all different, kind of areas where different government entities get involved. And so transit has to answer to those. So again, when you have complex regulatory environment, you tend to have people being cautious. Right now, costs are rising as we're all experiencing. Costs are going up right now. And that is certainly true for transit. Particularly right now, vehicle costs are going up. And some of that is tariff related, but it was already happening before the tariffs because of other pressures in the industry. Fuel costs right now are actually a little bit down, but those tend to fluctuate quite a bit. Insurance costs are up a lot right now. And anything that has to do with driver and staff labor, those costs are also quite a bit higher. So what's happening now is you have rising costs and you have constrained funding. I'm going to tell you that the funding picture for transit is actually better than a lot of industries that get federal money. But overall, even though the funding is relatively good, when you have rising costs with a budget that isn't rising, what you actually have is less buying power. And so transit is being squished. We have an aging workforce and chronic workforce shortages. The workforce is getting older by the day. And of course, now with some of the pressures that people are facing, they're not leaving the workforce. We're not getting as many young people in. And so we have an older workforce. We have lots of shortages of personnel. And that is putting some pressure on us as well. For all of those reasons, we have an environment that favors the status quo. Nobody wants to take a risk. Nobody is sure what they're allowed to do sometimes. And so with all of that complexity and the rising costs and those challenges, people tend to want to keep doing what they've been doing that works, even if they know they could do better, they tend to want to do what they're already doing because they know that they won't get in trouble. And that does create challenges for people that want to change things. So after all that, I labeled this slide a time of opportunity for public transit, which sounds almost ridiculous, but it actually is a time of opportunity. And I actually think when I did this in April, I sort of believed it. And now that it's like September, October, it really is a time. I've now gotten to meet people that there aren't too many bright spots. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Political appointments have been challenging, but one of the bright spots among all the appointments that have been made by the administration is the administrator of the Federal Transit Administration. It's a guy named Mark Molinaro. He is now telling the industry how they have to operate. His top 2 priorities are safety and accessibility. And it's not a secret. He has a daughter with a disability. As a result of that, he is pretty sensitive to disability and accessibility issues. It's personal for him, and he's made it very clear with the industry. And I've heard him directly. I've been in the audience when he's done it at conferences. He's been very direct that accessibility is important and that he expects the industry to be accessible. He's also done it in audiences that are not accessibility focused. Um, so it's not just him talking to people like me and telling us what he thinks we want to hear. He actually gave the accessibility lecture in a meeting that was focused primarily on transit funding. And it was primarily budget directors and CEOs and legislative people. And for him to say that in that audience, I've never heard it in my time in the industry. So that was pretty cool. Transit funding is even. We've got level funding, at least for now. I mean, right now the federal government has shut down, but the funding for transit has been proposed to stay even. So if and when, and I assume when, there's a reconciliation and some kind of a budget instrument that gets passed, transit will be funded at current levels. Again, that's not great because costs are going up. But compared to where most parts of the universe are right now, that's probably positive news. One of the things that's happening in the industry is there is a lot of conversation about focusing funding on results instead of just on how many trips an agency does. And that's going to encourage transit agencies to focus on outcomes instead of how many people they got on buses. And I do think we're going to start to see that language go into federal funding guidance so that if your agency gets money, they actually have to prove that they did something useful and that it actually benefited people. And I think that is going to help as we start to think about serving people who are blind or low vision, and especially when one of the priorities of the administration is accessibility. Lastly, we have a lot of emerging technologies and services that I think are making transportation potentially more accessible than it has been. And a lot of these things are also lowering the cost of how we have to do transportation. So we'll talk about some of that. So I want to talk about some of the promising developments, more specifically that are impacting transportation. I'll start with fixed route. And some of these you'll be familiar with and some might be new. First off, we are seeing a lot happening in what I call wayfinding technology. So this speaks to not just navigating to and from transit, although that's part of it, but also navigating within transit facilities. We're seeing the industry starting to adopt technologies like Good Maps, like IRA, like Waymap, and others that are helping people navigate to, from, and within transit systems. It is an area of focus, and these technologies aren't perfect, and they do have some limitations. But the fact that the industry is starting to actually spend money on these things is encouraging. There was just a study that is supporting the benefits of tactile walking surfaces. And that research is actually starting to be picked up by the industry. I don't know how much of it we're seeing yet beyond the basic curb detectable warnings at curbs. But I do know of a couple of projects that I'm working on where we're starting to talk about tactile walking surfaces being used to help people navigate within transit facilities. And I think it's a matter of time before other parts of the community start thinking about some of these newer technologies. There are now solar-powered accessible pedestrian signals. There's a company that was exhibiting at summer conferences last year to talk about, how do we get these solar-powered APSs out into the community. And power source was a big deal, so this is an opportunity to start advancing that. And then the last one here, we've all heard a lot about AI-powered smart glasses and wearables. There are so many of these hitting the market right now. Some of them are going to fail. Some of them are probably not ready for human consumption. But we're going to have more of this technology, and we're going to have more choices. The price points are coming down a little bit. And so I think this is positive because these technologies are starting to be useful for navigating transportation environments in the community. I personally use Seeing AI in combination with smart glasses, or not with smart glasses, with my phone. They don't have very good integrations yet, but eventually they will. And these technologies, I use them now and to navigate areas that I'm not familiar with. And I think more and more people are going to start finding ways to use this technology. There are some caveats with all this technology. A lot of them are smartphone based. We don't all have smartphones. I think ultimately that is an area where we need as a community to think about how do we get smartphones in the hands of more people and get them trained to use all these cool technologies. The other caveat is that many of these technologies are proprietary. They tend to be owned and created by smaller companies who are not always economically viable, and they come and go. And so there is some risk that about picking the right horse to ride into this new technology era. Talk about paratransit. So this is the world, obviously, user works in, and we are big believers in spontaneous paratransit. We shouldn't have to plan our lives a day in advance. I mean, I don't know anybody else that does that. If you've had kids, you already know that's impossible. And I think it's time for us to move on. We're seeing a lot of agencies start to use rideshare services in support of all sorts of things, on-demand paratransit, but also things like microtransit, first last mile connections to public transportation, all sorts of things. We are benefiting from that as a company. There are other companies who are also doing that. Of course, you've heard Uber and Lyft have lots of that service as well. Autonomous vehicles are being pilot tested for paratransit and other transportation. Excuse me, I know of one project in Minnesota that uses autonomous vehicles in a rural community. So these are services that are coming into existence now, and they are starting to impact communities. There are cautions around all of this. First off, we're having within the rideshare space, some of the rideshare providers aren't doing a very good job meeting the needs of all their riders, including those of us who are blind or have low vision. We've all heard about service animal denials, but there are other issues as well. Things like app accessibility, drivers providing an appropriate level of service because it's not what they typically do. And what is that? How's that all going to shake out? When used to replace paratransit, a lot of agencies are replacing paratransit with microtransit. Microtransit works very similarly, but it's a little bit different. It's more of a curb-to-curb service model. Not all riders can use it. And so it's really important if you're in a community where transit is trying to do that, that you're paying attention to that and making sure that riders' needs are being considered. And then finally, autonomous vehicles, they're not available yet in most places. And that technology is still evolving and it is still not really designed to be super accessible for folks who need a higher level of service. We always tell people if you're going to go take an autonomous vehicle, because we have them here in the Phoenix area, you need to know what you're getting into because there is a level of unpredictability. And you need to have some personal survival skills and a bit of a sense of humor if you're going to use that technology. So they're coming, but they're not there yet. So let's talk about how and where advocate. And this is kind of where the rubber hits the road. So let me just talk about where federal advocacy makes sense. First off, funding. The federal government does fund a lot of stuff. They fund equipment. They fund vehicles, technology. They do fund some kind of innovative pilot programs, and those come out periodically. So there is a need to advocate. Next year, we are reauthorizing the 5-year transportation spending bill, and I can tell you that we, USERV, are already paying attention to those conversations. The community should as well. and the community should be prepared to advocate for things that are important. And we'll have a lot of conversation on the transportation working group as we get closer. Federal government is also regulations governing minimum levels of accessibility, things like digital accessibility, transit accessibility, accessibility of transit facilities, which is an area that the government was about to do something with, and then we had the change of administration and that got put on hold, but it may come back. There are other kinds of things at the federal level within ADA and within some of the other laws that affect service availability that we may want to pay attention to. We also want to get the federal government to accept what are called the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines, or PROAG. These are really important because they address a lot of issues that blind and low vision people face when navigating their communities. We need to get the Department of Transportation to adopt PROAG as the standard that governs accessibility within transit facilities. And we need to get the Department of Justice to insist on it for communities and other entities that are building infrastructure. At the state level, the advocacy we need to do is we need to advocate for money for transportation operations. State money helps match federal money. It also can help meet needs that local governments can't meet. States are also a potential good venue to try to advocate for changes that we can't get at the federal level. One example would be work that's been done in a couple of states to try to make paratransit eligibility easier and more automatic for people whose disabilities don't change. Also advocating for pedestrian infrastructure improvement. States get quite a bit more money than the federal government gets for transportation, pedestrian projects. Some of that money should be earmarked to make improvements for our stuff. At the local and regional level, the advocacy is really about type of services to be offered. It's really, how are we serving our community? When and where is service going to be made available? How is it designed? Policies, procedures, fares, funding that comes from the local to make sure there's enough. You'll see from time to time a local government will put up a sales tax initiative or a gas tax initiative or some other kind of funding instrument to fund transportation. We want to be paying attention to those and supporting them when we can, because usually those funds are what can help a transit agency do something innovative within the community. Getting near the end, just want to talk a little bit about where public transit isn't, and I'm going to wrap up in about 5 minutes if I possibly can, so I'll leave at least Denise a few minutes. 45% of folks don't have access to transportation. There are some options out there, which I've listed on the slide. Retail taxi cabs. We talked earlier about these. They're expensive. However, there are ways for agencies, I think, to think through how to maybe leverage buying power to get some transportation that relates for your consumers to get to and from programs. Especially if you're in an area where the transit agency is already doing some of those services, there may be some creative ways to try to advocate to get maybe a partnership that involves your transit agency and you and a rideshare provider, let's say. There are other sponsors of transportation. VA sponsors some, although they've been cutting back. Medicaid, again, cutbacks. Transit is good in in kind of our new government reality. A lot of these other areas are taking some pretty hard cuts. And when I wrote this in April, they hadn't happened yet, and now we're starting to see them. Intercity transportation is still an option. It is not, especially in rural areas. This might be your best option. And then finally is volunteer programs, and volunteer programs have kind of come and gone, and but there is some interesting work being done in places like Maine And I think I think there are a few other states that are trying to figure out how to solve for transportation for folks who are in areas where they can't get it any other way. So here's how VSA members can support better transportation in your communities. Designate a transportation champion within your organization. So somebody who can step up, who can be well informed, who can pay attention and go to the meetings and speak up when necessary, and most importantly, report back so that you know within your agency what's going on. Educate your staff, educate them on the importance of transportation. They mostly probably already know, but just making sure they know what's going on and keeping them informed so they can inform clients. Build relationships with transit agencies and municipal staff leaders who are who really believe in supporting the communities that they serve. So, finding those people who agree with you that it's important to serve the community and building relationships, getting them out to your facilities, getting them to see how transportation affects your clients and how it affects your programs, so that when they're making decisions and making recommendations, they're doing it with a knowledge of how it affects the people that you are serving. Next slide. This is my last substantive slide here. Just a few more things that y'all can do to support better transportation. Collect data. Not fancy data, but collect data. Quantitative would be how many people you're transporting, how they get to the facility, what kind of issues they're having with service. What's good, what's bad. Document the unmet needs. If you have people that you are not able to serve because they don't have transportation or they don't have access to transportation, document those so that you have that information and can share it when the time comes. Share that data and tell your stories locally. When you're at a board meeting, having data that says, hey, we served 5,000 people and we would have served more. We would have served another 500, but we couldn't get them to our facility. Those are people now who can't get jobs because we can't support them to get the training they need. Be a voice for the transportation needs of your community and your clients. Be a spokesperson. I can tell you that I spend a lot of time in the disability community encouraging advocates to speak up. But you as agency folks can speak for larger groups of people. And that really resonates with policymakers. So having you all involved is a big deal. Within VSA, share the challenges that you're experiencing and also share your successes so other people can learn. People like Denise are valuable because she can talk about what's working in her community and how y'all can make that work in your community. And that's really what I have. I know it's a ton of information, so I'm going to stop. I've got a contact link here on the very last slide. Happy to take any questions or conversations offline that we don't get to today. And with that, I'm going to thank you and turn it to Denise.
Ron, thank you. It is always such a pleasure to work together. I think Ron and I are a pretty dynamic duo. Ron brings that industry perspective and the working across multiple sectors and the lived experience, and I bring the lived experience and the putting rubber to the road from an agency perspective. So my hope in the couple of minutes that I have with you is to really light a fire to encourage you all to get involved in the transportation working group. So I'll just start by saying happy Pedestrian Safety Month, everybody. Today, October 1st, begins National Pedestrian Safety Month. It's an effort that my organization takes really seriously. We do our pedestrian and transportation advocacy work at the local and state level year round, but we can really ramp it up this time of year. And if you visit our website at wcblind.org, you can get your hands on a pedestrian safety toolkit with lots and lots of stuff for advocates. So I really encourage you to get your hands on that so that you can begin ramping up your advocacy efforts. It is really critical for those of us who lead and work in blind serving organizations to become advocates for transportation. I know that we have a lot on our plates. We know firsthand how transportation options or lack thereof impact the quality of life for the folks we serve and for ourselves and for our workforces. So Ron and I co-facilitate the Transportation Working Group, which is a project of the Aging and Vision Loss National Coalition and Vision Serve Alliance. And the two of us gather folks every other month. Our next meeting is Thursday, November 6th at 1 o'clock Eastern for about an hour. And it provides an opportunity between the two of us. We're able to find some pretty dynamic speakers who can come and work with us around particularly important transportation issues. For example, we've had folks talk with us about the pedestrian right-of-way access guidelines and what they mean and why they're important. And then we together talk about how do we do advocacy work on them. So our hope always is that the attendees will walk away not only with more knowledge, but with concrete actionables in their pockets to carry forward. We've talked about paratransit and what some of the issues are at paratransit and how to advocate at the local level. So both Ron and I have a passion for this work, but also a high level of passion for practicality. So when you come to the Transportation Working Group, you can expect a dynamic presentation and important conversation about how to move transportation forward and what we can do, whether your organization is just dipping its toes into transportation or if you are up to your cheekbones in transportation advocacy, which is where I would say I'm at these days. I want to extend the invitation that Ron made to you at the beginning. I am always available to have a transportation advocacy conversation with folks in agencies. Work at the state level. I can talk with you about how to get advocate for and get a state level advisory committee going, how to get yourself onto the Board of Public Works or Transportation Commission in your community, how to tap into the talent and wisdom of your orientation and mobility specialists, because they're out in the community. They see it, experience it every day. So if you want to have a very practical, hands-on next steps conversation, just reach out to me. So please consider joining us in the Transportation Working Group. Again, we meet approximately every other month for about an hour, typically on Thursdays. And Helen from VSA is so good about getting the invitations and the calendar invites out. And those meetings are not typically recorded. So being in the meeting and being part of the conversation is really awesome. So Ron, let me turn it to you to see if you have anything else kind of on the, come join the party, because we do good work together and we really need more voices in this pool. In the last few years, what I've observed with state legislators, especially as we were able to do some data gathering to tell legislators that 31% of Wisconsinites do not drive, is it's been a wake-up call. And as I have conversations with them and I ask them who in their lives are non-drivers, it's been some pretty moving conversations. So I'm seeing, even though we're not seeing the funding follow through yet in the ways that I would like, I'm seeing a shift in receptivity among our state elected folks, and I'm seeing a big shift on the local level. So the time is now to tell our stories and to continuously lift up transportation as a really important issue to the quality of life for those of us with disabilities.
There, it looks like there is a comment in
Yeah, perfect.
in the chat. So Wendy, can you give me a hand with that? And then I don't know if we want to shut off, if we want to unmute everybody for a moment and let someone ask a question. But
Yeah, let's do
so
that, Jason, after we deal with that, after we deal
sure.
with the
So
question.
I,
Yeah,
I'm gonna, it looks like, Wendy, interrupt me if I'm getting this wrong, but someone was identifying that, with White Cane Awareness Day coming
yep,
up, that's really a good time to talk about pedestrian safety, to talk
yep.
about public transportation. They'd like to get some more information. We put in the chat Denise's toolkit for that, but I didn't know if either one of you, and they put their website address here, which I will make sure we address something to.
Yeah.
But if either one of you wanted to talk
Excellent.
about perhaps tying that to White Cane, and then if someone can manage
Yep.
doing the mics and letting one more question happen, and then I'll wrap us up.
Sure, I can kick that off. So White Cane Safety Day was our gateway into pedestrian safety. So we have been doing advocacy work here at the Wisconsin Council of the Blind and Visually Impaired around White Cane Safety Day for very, very long time, using it as an opportunity to teach people about the law. We also reach out to municipalities throughout our state and ask those mayors and town chairs to issue White Cane Safety Day proclamations. So it's being spoken of in front of city councils and town boards. We get invitations to those communities, some of them, so we can speak directly. We have put together toolkits over the years, but over time, we continue to expand that effort because pedestrian safety is even wider than stopping for a pedestrian carrying a white cane or using a service animal. So we now do both a combined pedestrian safety and White Cane Safety Day. So thanks for putting the toolkit link into the chat, and I think there'll be something in the VSA newsletter as well that links to that toolkit.
Yep.
Excellent.
All right.
But before we go, is it possible to get one live voice question in just for the mood of it, and then I'll wrap us up. All right, I'll give it like
one
go ahead.
question that was emailed. If no one wants to come off mute.
Okay. In the essence of time, Wendy, you take your one more question. I'm going to wrap us up because we have like a minute.
Okay. We had someone that emailed before who was very excited about this, and they are in San Antonio, Texas, and they're saying that Waymo and other autonomous ride shares have begun service in Austin and Dallas, but they live in San Antonio and they want to know how to start a conversation with city officials. So any advice there?
So yeah, real quick, right now, the companies who are launching in the autonomous vehicle space, they are really driving the schedule and the locations where service is launching. What I would encourage that person to do is to reach directly out to some of those AV providers. I don't believe the cities are driving that conversation. And in fact, I think the other thing that people might want to consider is the community needs to start talking about a regulatory framework for autonomous vehicles, because it's going to come hopefully sooner rather than later, because we need some structure around how that industry launches. That should be something that as blind and low vision people and agencies that we are focused on, because it's going to affect us.
Yeah, that's something we're doing in Wisconsin, is we're working on the framework for any AV pilots and in regulatory guidance. So yeah, the time is now.
Yeah,
I think that's excellent advice. So thank you both. What I will simply say here is I want to thank both Denise and Ron very, very much for today's presentation. We have identified that that this is one of the pillars, one of the goals of Vision Serve Alliance is to stay on top of transportation issues, to help our agencies advocate for transportation issues. We believe it is really a significant and important piece of the vision rehabilitation process. And it is an important piece of people living, independent, dignified, safe lives as people living with vision loss. And those are the goals that we all have in common in our mission statements and in our communities, in our lives. So I just very much want to encourage that. I want to encourage participation in the transportation group. If you're interested, to please reach to Denise and Ron for that and anything else we can help with. It is the Pedestrian Safety Month. It is White Cane Day this month. It is NADIUM this month. Transportation is a huge part of people with disabilities getting to and from work. There are so many opportunities to take advantage of here. As a representative from Vision Serve Alliance, we are thrilled to be able to host webinars like this. We had a terrific attendance today. We thank you so much for attending. Thank you so much for putting Vision Serve on your calendar and giving us some of your time, and are really hopeful that webinars like this continue to be helpful to you and the constituents and consumers that you serve. On that note, I'll say thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.